The One Thing is here, where we take a look at one specific topic, one specific question, one specific idea. Today, it's one question. And who's that one question for? Well, if we had the opportunity to ask former Disney CEO and Chairman Michael Eisner one question, what would that be? Michael Eisner, the former Walt Disney Company CEO and Chairman, as mentioned, he is somebody that served the Walt Disney Company as the foremost leader from the mid-'80s all the way up until the early 2000s before a shareholder revolt ended up being his demise. It was a pretty dark time for the company. However, Michael Eisner, many people celebrate for the fact that he kind of saved Disney in the 80s and then made it a household name all over again, sort of re-emphasized the importance of Disney globally, and really laid the foundation for the Disney decade of the 1990s, you know, when times were good. But he was somebody that definitely made a lot of impact on Disney parks in general, everything from the expansion of Walt Disney World and just how spectacular that became, and then also the not-so-great expansion to the Disneyland Resort with DCA version 1. Yeah. So at any rate, Tyler, when it comes to one question for Disney CEO and Chairman, former Michael Eisner, what would you have on the top of your head?
I guess as far as like a general question goes that's less about Disney in general, to be honest, I feel like I would ask him how personally did... Well, let me back up.
Okay, back up.
So Frank Wells, you know, was his right-hand man, and he died in a tragic helicopter accident when he was skiing, I believe, and you know, I think that really affected Eisner in a big way, and at least it did professionally. But I guess I would ask him, you know, how did he feel just losing what seemed to be not just a coworker, but also a good friend of his. You know, how did that affect him personally as well as professionally? But you know, I think the main question that I would love to ask him about Disney is, what would he do? Because obviously we all now love California Adventure. It's a great park, but when it first came about, it wasn't the park it should have been. I think everybody can admit that. I think Disney admitted that in the fact that they redid the entire park, basically, right? Or if he could go back and kind of redo the whole planning of California Adventure and how much money they decided to put into it and kind of how much they decided to pull back on kind of that Disney magic, like, what would he change at this point? Because, you know, we've obviously have Buena Vista Street, which is a much better opening to a park than the original DCA 1.0 was. But yeah, it was an underwhelming park when it first opened. So what kind of things did he think they did that they misstepped, and what would he do to fix that?
Certainly lots of storied history chronicles of Michael Eisner era, and a lot of ideas that were put forward originally for what was going to be the second gate for the Disneyland Resort. And we've heard of two in particular that sounded just incredible. Port Disney, which would have been out at Long Beach, and then Westcott, which would have been the West Coast equivalent of Epcot, both of which, you know, over the course of years, designs have been sort of leaked over the course of time, and seeing what originally, I guess, was cooking just looks spectacular, based on some of the original concepts Imagineers had come up with. But to be a fly on the wall, you're right, Tyler, to hear from, I guess maybe at that time, to be a fly on the wall and to pay attention to sort of what those conversations were like in the beginning of planning, and then what it was like towards the end, where they finally decided on, and we're going to have a park about California in California.
Yeah.
Because that makes a lot of sense.
It's still a really interesting choice, even to this day, but at least they realize now that, you know, I think the original idea was like, hey, people can come to our theme park and then they won't have to go to San Francisco or any of these other places because we'll have the Golden Gate Bridge right here, you know? And it just, the people that want to see the sights of California aren't going to be like, well, let's just go to a theme park and that'll be like the same thing. It's just not like that. So at least they've realized now that they need to change, like with Buena Vista Street, for example. It's Hollywood, but it's a different time period for Hollywood, you know? So I think they've realized that, like,
they connected it all to Walt, right?
Yeah,
you know,
they
that
connected
makes
it to
a big
Walt.
difference.
And yeah, but beyond that too, it's just like they realized that people aren't going to come just to see this so-called site. They're not real sites.
Living brochure.
Yeah, exactly. They got to make it something special, and tying it back to Walt Disney is one of those ways they did it. Even the pier, they've realized we need to change the pier because, when Walt Disney first set out to build his theme park, he was like, I don't want it to be like all the other parks. I don't want it to be
not an amusement park, not a carnival.
Yeah,
that's not what we're doing here.
And what did they do when they built the pier? They built the carnival that Walt Disney said he didn't want his park to be. So, they've realized at this point they had to inject some Disney magic into every single facet of that theme park, and it's been working. You brought up Westcott and stuff, and I think that DCA now more than ever is actually feels a lot like Epcot in certain ways when you think about the different festivals and how it kind of has become about more of a food and drink thing, more adult oriented, I feel like, than Disneyland is. So I think that they've been doing a good job of turning it around, but I would be really curious to see what Missteps Eisner thought they made.
Very cool. Yeah. You left several comments on our YouTube community page over at the King Report on YouTube. Here's what you had to say. Princess Marlena says, "What the hell were you smoking regarding Disneyland Paris? But I'll admit, Phantom Manor is pretty awesome." Mitchell says, "If you were given a second chance to run the company, what would you do differently compared to your last run?" C. Munoz says, "Can you please come back? Not that you're the greatest CEO Disney has had, but definitely better than the current one." Jake says, "Would you handle your leadership decisions?" Oh, yeah. Would you handle your leadership decisions? I think he means yes, differently after Frank Wells's death. Jasmine says, "Would you ever come back as CEO of the company? Because we need saving." And BY says, "I would ask him, how do we get rid of Bob Chapek?" Although they write paycheck, and bring the magic back to Disneyland. Repeating themes there. We see for Michael Eisner, if people had one question for him. Katrina, let's throw it on over to you. You got a chance to ask Michael Eisner a question. What are you going to ask the guy?
A very general one is one of them. What was your favorite tie?
Oh, he wore a lot of those Mickey ties.
Because he always loved wearing the ties, and it just brought more of like his fun, like not like goofy self, but just like the love for his company, right?
Yeah.
So like you don't see Bob Chapek wearing anything, like not even his name tag. So I think that was really great. So I'm curious what his favorite tie was,
I like that.
and whatnot. And a serious one about the company would just be, if you're able to go back and like if you're able to become like CEO again, would you try to come back and like redo and try to bring like a Westcott, or try to bring like Port Disney or something there and bring it back? And then if he's able to even go back in time and change something, what would it be? If he was able to have like the funds and money to do it, like Euro Disney and whatnot, when he first started opening it.
Feels like that may have been his biggest blunder ever. Certainly the most costly blunder of all time was Disneyland Paris, Euro Disneyland, as they called it at the time. Amazing history when it comes to that story, too. More of your comments now. What would you ask Michael Eisner? Here's what you said. Anthony says, "Whatever possessed you to make DCA 1.0 the most abomination planet on planet Earth, rather?" Grant J says, "What do you think about DCA today?" I'd like to know that too. Mike's Adventure says, "Will you admit you stole park plan ideas from Universal and opened Disney MGM Studios? And did you blunder and not read the contract details of the MGM name usage rights for the park?" That's two, but the first is more important. Melvin says, "Did you ever mend fences with Roy Disney before he died, and Jeffrey Katzenberg?" Yes, that's right. Both two men that he had quite the falling out with, Roy Disney having brought him to Disney to save the company. And then in the end, Roy Disney asked him, can you leave? You are creating a hellscape for all of us.
I would love to ask Roy Disney about Chapek at this point after his thoughts on Eisner, because Eisner is a saint and angel compared to what we've got going on now. But anyway,
moving along, Melvin says, FM Jeeping says, "How often do you think? What would Walt do prior to making decisions? How would you think Walt would react to the current state of events at the parks and company?" Mad Mal says, "Why did you screw over the people mover at Disneyland?"
Yeah. Euro Disney is no big deal compared to what they did to the people mover.
We have never gotten over it. That's
No.
right. Oh, please says, "Why Paul Pressler, executive of the 90s, that led to a dramatic downfall of the Disneyland Resort, that's for sure." A lot of lack of care certainly vies for one of the most hated executives in the company, probably next to Bob Chapek. I don't know. Certainly something that, in terms of if we ran a poll, Paul Pressler versus Bob Chapek, I don't know.
That's a good one. That's
you know,
a good
for,
poll.
for people that were around at that time that remember the Paul Pressler era, it was a dark one.
Really remember Paul
But ladies and gentlemen, we want to know from you, if you had one question to ask Michael Eisner, former Disney CEO and chairman, what would it be? Leave it in our comments. As always, your perspective, it matters.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.